Let's take a listen at this video. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, he dropped some bombshell, and the host was literally silent, watching and listening to what he was saying.
And President Trump is effectively his instrument. He's not going to do anything or say anything that Mr. Netanyahu doesn't want him to say. He's been on the phone recently to Mr. Netanyahu, and people that overheard the conversation have mentioned that, he talks in gangster terms about what they're going to do. Well, we'll break their legs. They'll pay a price for this and on and on. It's this tough guy talk that is common in New York City. He likes that. And so he's very much on board with this war. And
I just want to add one thing here, guys, real quick. So there is this new report. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's a U.S. I think she's in the Congress or something like that. But she basically said that the reason John F. Kennedy was assassinated was because he wanted Israel to stop its nuclear program. That's the reason why he got killed. Now we are seeing Donald Trump is acting exactly the way Israel wants him to act, as the colonel is also alluding that Donald Trump was on the phone with Netanyahu, spoke to him, and then at the end of the day, even though Donald Trump talks big, but he listens and he obeys Netanyahu, his command, and the Zionist lobby. So the same thing is being repeated in U.S. history, presidential history, over and over again, that you step out of the way and you act against Israel's interest, we will be assassinating you. And on top of this, we already know that perhaps there's a good possibility, and according to Elon Musk, Donald Trump is on Epstein's file. So Netanyahu has dirty laundry of Donald Trump on him. He can always expose Donald Trump, blackmail him, telling him, if you don't listen to me, what I'm saying you, then you'll be in trouble and I'll expose your past and you go to jail.
Is convinced that he and others will profit from Iran's destruction. Now, I don't think it'll work. And I think that we're going to discover there are limits to air and missile power. And we're going to see that. We're also dealing with a very different state from what we would have seen 20 years ago. So that many of the scenarios that we've run through wargaming probably are irrelevant, because Iran is far more technologically advanced today and far more capable than it was 20 years ago. We tend to talk about Iran the way the Israelis do. They treat it as though 46 years have not passed. And Iran is just this backward Muslim state that can be bullied and attacked at will. That's not going to happen. And if we get into this, we are going to sustain losses. And the operation that we're talking about launching in the very near future involves hundreds of aircraft. It's very complex. Everyone thinks it's simply a function of fly B-2 bombers that are invisible, invulnerable, invincible at 40,000 feet over Iranian airspace and drop these munition penetrators that are supposed to punch through mountains and destroy the so-called enrichment, radiation or uranium enrichment facilities. In truth, this is going to focus, I think, primarily on the destruction of the regime. And they've targeted everything down to police stations in Tehran and other cities. They want to try and paralyze Iran, make it incapable of holding itself together and responding. Now, again, I don't think that's going to work, because I think the Iranians have some surprises for them. But this is where we're headed. Secondarily, we're talking about damaging these uranium enrichment facilities or nuclear development facilities. I'm not sure we believe that we can destroy them with the conventional munitions. And I've already heard talk about, MRR. These is minimal residual radiation warheads. In other words, low yield nuclear warheads designed to penetrate these places, and that they might come into use. I think that would be a very bad idea, because I think that would open Pandora's box in a major way. So I think there's a certain amount of reality intruding in thinking about how far you're going to get punching through mountains. But I see much more confidence in their thinking about what they can do to destroy and dominate Iran itself.
I mean, this was also being echoed by Dmitry Medvedev, as the colonel said that using low-yield nuclear weapon to destroy these nuclear sites where United States already bombed with B-2 bunker buster. Medvedev said that if that is the case, if they're going to be using any kind of nuclear warhead against Iran, targeting those sites, then Iran can get a nuclear weapon from any country. And Medvedev, Russian former president, was to me looks like referring to Russia itself, that if Iran needs a nuclear warhead, a weapon, to be used against Israel or to U.S. bases in the Middle East, we have no problem supplying you with that. So Douglas Macgregor, what he's saying exactly what was being mentioned by this very important right-hand man of Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Medvedev.
Again, I think it's very dangerous. I think the whole thing is very complex, and I don't think ultimately it will work. But we will see. In the meantime, the Chinese, the Russians, and others, Pakistanis, and not just those, but other countries have poured assets into Iran to help the Iranians defend themselves. I think some of these will make a difference. So this is no cakewalk. And this is going to be very dangerous and very complex. And even on the best day, it might not work.
Well, it does seem, as you mentioned, the objective of decapitation, destroying the nuclear sites, and of course subordinating Iran. But you also see Israel hijacking or hacking some of the TV stations, and they had, calling on Iranians to have this uprising. So, if for some reason you will have millions of Iranians supporting the country who's bombing them and going against their own government, uh, are they how much have they, because underestimated Iran's military capabilities, obviously. Have they also underestimated the mood in Iran? I mean, I'm sure there's many people have real grievances, if not even hatred towards a government which they don't care for. I think it's a bit exaggerated, to be honest, but you always find grievances. But the idea that they would side with the enemy against their own government, is this too much wishful thinking? Or how do you, I guess, explain the very extravagant objectives which have been set?
You mean the idea that we are bombing these people while we are also telling them that they are our friends and we are their friends is a bit contradictory?
Yeah,
Uh,
somewhat.
by the way, that we're bombing you to liberate you from a government that you don't really want, and your friends in Israel are putting together another governmental structure with the former or the crown prince's son or the former son of the Shah, whatever you want to call him, who is a willing puppet of Israel, who will come in and take over and put everything right. I mean, stop and think about it all. It's all crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't people that dislike the government. There are a lot of people in the United States that dislike the government. But I haven't seen large numbers of Israeli and American flags on the streets of Tehran or Isfahan or Tabriz or anywhere else, flying, saying, "Oh, come and save us. We love you." Haven't seen that. Now, I have seen in the United States, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, may have seen it in Seattle and some other places, Mexican flags flying with large numbers of Hispanics cheering the destruction of America. Uh, that I've seen, but I haven't seen any American or Israeli flags on the streets of Iranian cities.
That's
So to be
interesting.
perfectly blunt, I think it's nonsense. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do a lot of damage to the infrastructure, cause enormous chaos and confusion, potentially even cause people to run out of water that they can drink and starve the way they are in Gaza. I suppose that's possible. But I don't think it's a viable plan.
Well, all this talks about weapons of mass destruction and being met as liberators, it all sounds, yeah, awfully lot like 2003 with Iraq. But unlike Iraq, the United States had massive ground forces, and also the technical and military capabilities were overwhelming. The
Well,
Iraqis.
if I may just stop you briefly, and I would tell
Yeah.
you that had we just gone into Iraq in 2003 and removed Saddam Hussein, then turned the country over to the nation's military leaders and urged them to invite the United Nations in to help supervise the restoration of government and elections and so forth, and then left, we would have been very successful. Certainly in the South, when we came in, the Shiites were very happy to see us. There's no question about it. But then they kind of hoped that we would leave. This is the problem. Benjamin Franklin used to say, guests in your house like fish after 2 or 3 days stink. The point is that it's one thing to welcome somebody to come in and remove somebody else for you and then leave versus somebody comes in, removes who was there, and then ultimately turns out to be worse than what you had and kills large numbers of you in the process. So, you're right. Iraq and Iran are different, but we need to understand what we did in 2003 that was very stupid. We occupied. You never occupy if you can avoid it. And there was no reason to occupy in Iraq. There was no reason to dismantle the government, its administration. And we need to remember who was responsible for that. His name is Paul Wolfowitz. And that little coterie of people that took over the Pentagon, intelligence, and everything else in the Bush administration that were insistent that the road to Jerusalem and freedom went through Baghdad. I mean, just imagine what an asinine statement. But that's what they said. The same kinds of people, exactly the same, pushed the war in Ukraine against Russia. They are pushing the war now on behalf of Israel against Iran. We were always going to be involved in this fight because there is no alternative to our participation. Only complete failure and eventually destruction of Israel. So we had to come in on this fight. By the way, the same financial interests in London and New York City that wanted to destroy Russia, destroy its state, destroy the government, turn it into a globalist paradise, introducing millions of non-Europeans into Russia. The same globalists who wanted to strip Russia of its resources. They are the ones who want to get control of the oil and gas resources in the Middle East, and especially in Iran. And they want to break it up into small parts that they can then treat as vassal states of the greater Israeli state, which in reality is a vanguard for the globalist victory that they're hoping to achieve in the Middle East.
I mean, the military complex is obviously working day and night to start a new war. The last one we have seen, the biggest one perhaps in a very long time, was Iraq War. And now we're seeing, in matter of just 20 years, another war in Iran. And in between this time, we had so many more wars and battles and skirmishes and conflicts going on in the Middle East. Like, you will never get exhausted of this kind of news. Is coming almost on a regular daily basis. This military industrial complex, they must be stopped. These are some and very selected few who is starting this war for really no reason except for their own benefit, and who are paying the price. It is the people. Now, when they went into Iraq, this U.S. military forces, they could not just leave. They could not just pack up, because they were killing innocent civilians. 1 million Iraqis were dead, according to some reports. You cannot just leave a country after killing so many people, except that you would have to be prepared for a retaliation. And Iraqis, they were going to come after the U.S. Military bases in the Middle East had they left Iraq right after killing so many people. So the point is that it is never a good idea to invade another country, even to bomb them or to even threat them, because when you do these things, you really walk down to the path of destruction and war that brings nobody any peace, but complete chaos and destabilization of an entire region.
Yeah, I remember the Iraq being the pathway to Iran, but how possible is it to, again, Trump set this very high goal of complete surrender on the Iranians, but with merely airstrikes and naval assets, this seems to be somewhat difficult, but also because how do you enter Iran? Would the Americans attack through the same corridor of Israel uses through Syria and Iraq, or would the United States attack from the sea? But if so, they can't get into the Persian Gulf, and it's still unclear to what extent perhaps even Pakistan will help intercept any missiles launched against Iran. Again, so far it's all speculations, but there's many of the neighbors who are not quite happy about this scenario. So. But if the goal is simply to make Iran one big Gaza, to inflict much punishment, what can be done, and what can be expected of retaliatory attacks? I mean, has the United States moved many of its strategic assets away from vulnerable places? Does it still have the fleet in Bahrain, or has I guess what preparations are being made?
My understanding is that all the U.S. military personnel have been removed from Bahrain. I think we're trying to move U.S. uniformed and intelligence personnel to safe places in the region, or at least places that are unlikely to be attacked. How many have we managed to move at this point? I don't know. I think that's also had an impact on delaying the operation. But Bahrain, which is a very important place to the United States, particularly the United States Navy and Air Force, that has been evacuated. But I think the larger issue is much more straightforward. We have to understand what these goals mean. And then we have to ask ourselves, first of all, does this make any sense? I don't think it makes any sense. I think it's insane. And I've opposed this kind of thinking from the beginning. We don't live in the Eastern Hemisphere. We're Americans. We live in the Western Hemisphere. What are we doing? What are we trying to do? Is this going to improve the situation for Israel? I don't think so, because the loss that I think is inevitable in this contest will make it very hard for Israel to survive. And if they try to threaten the use of a nuclear weapon, if we don't do what they want us to do, or if any of their neighbors don't do what they tell them to do, they'll end up being on the receiving end of a nuclear weapon. These things have a bad habit of showing up in other people's hands. So I wouldn't write it off. Just because Iran hasn't built a nuclear weapon doesn't mean one couldn't become available if the Israelis threaten that. But here's the key thing, and you've come back to this again and again. We are not a continental power. Neither is Israel. Israel is a small colony that sits on the Mediterranean, and it is acting as though it's a great power because it has unconditional support from us. And we think that we can do to Iran what we plan to do to Russia. The entire global South is coming on side with Iran. Many European states are going to come on side with Iran that haven't done so yet. And then, of course, you have the usual suspects, India, China, BRICS, everybody involved in that are going to side with Iran. And more technology, equipment, and support is coming into Iran. The only thing we in the United States will achieve as a result of our actions is to become a pariah state all over the world. We're going to be hated and despised for what we're doing. We already are, but it's only going to get worse because the war is going to get worse. Now,
I mean, of course, United States have become a pariah state. It has become a rogue state by flouting international laws when it comes to helping Israel, regardless of what Israel is doing. And Israel, because of them, United States right now finding itself completely isolated. Nobody really trusts U.S. anymore. They have lost the hegemony in terms of policies that are being made in the Middle East and how it impacts or how U.S. influences those. We are seeing really the end of the United States, the empire of it, and thanks to Israel for making it happen.
Will the war last a week, 12 months, 18 months, 10 days? I suppose a lot of that depends on the destruction. And right now, the destruction on the ground in Israel is substantial. And you have to ask yourself the question, 92 million people in an area the size of Western Europe versus far fewer than the 7+ million that live there normally in an area a little smaller than New Jersey. Who is going to come out on top? Can the aircraft carrier battle groups and the United States Air Force make a profound difference to that outcome? I'm skeptical.
Absolutely not. I mean, again, Iran is a big country and they're not going to back down. They treat Israel as a colony. As Professor Marandi famously said, that Iran was not ever preparing to war against Israel. Rather, they were preparing to war against the United States of America. Thank you guys. Subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.